Welcome to meeting number 118 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, April 18th, 2024, the committee is commencing its study of Competition Act and air travel in northern, rural and remote communities. Before we begin, I'd like to remind all members and other meeting participants in the room of the following important preventative measures. To prevent disruptive and potentially harmful audio feedback incidents that can cause injuries, all in-person participants are reminded to keep their earpieces away from the microphones at all times. As indicated in the communique from the Speaker to all members on Monday, April 29th, the following measures have been taken to help prevent audio feedback incidents. All earpieces have been replaced by a model which greatly reduces the probability of audio feedback. These new earpieces are black in color, whereas the former earpieces were gray. Please only use the black-approved earpieces. By default, all unused earpieces will be unplugged at the start of the meeting. When you're not using your earpiece, please place it face down in the middle of the sticker for this purpose that you will find on the table as indicated. Please consult the cards on the table for guidelines to prevent audio feedback incidents. The room layout has been adjusted to increase the distance between microphones and reduce the chance of feedback from an ambient earpiece. These measures are in place so that we can conduct our business without interruption and, of course, to protect the health and safety of all participants, including our interpreters. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. In accordance with the committee's routine motion concerning connection tests for witnesses, I'd like to inform all members that the witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. With that, colleagues, I'd like to now welcome our witnesses. Appearing before us from Air North, we have Mr. Joseph Sparling, President by video conference. Welcome to you, sir. From Canadian North Inc., we have Shelley DeCaria, President and Chief Executive Officer. Welcome to you. Pardon? Oh, yes, and Mr. Purich, who's not on my list, but we very much are grateful for your presence here, sir. From Northern Air Transportation Association, we have Monsieur Bernard Gervais, Executive Director by video conference. Bienvenue, welcome to you, sir. From the town of Smithers, we have Gladys Attrell, Mayor by video conference. Welcome to you, Mayor. And from the l'Union des municipalités du Québec, nous avons Daniel Côté, Président.
We have Daniel Côté, President, Air Transport Committee, and Marie-Dominique Giguère, Project Manager. Welcome to you both. We'll start with Mr. Sparling.
5 minutes, sir.
Afternoon, or morning, I guess, and thanks for giving Air North Yukon's airline an opportunity to provide input to this standing committee. My discussion will focus on market research, industry concentration, competitive opportunities for small airlines, and domestic airfares. Canada is a small market, ranking number 2 in size, but 222 out of 232.
Mr. Sparling, my sincere apologies, sir. I'm just getting word from our interpreters that they would like to have your microphone raised somewhat so they can hear you a little better.
All right. How's that?
Okay, I'm getting the thumbs up, sir. If you'd like, you can restart or you can continue from where you left off.
Okay. Canada is a small market, ranking number 2 in size, but 222 out of 232 in population relative to the rest of the world. 90% of our population live in 10% of our landmass, roughly along the 49th parallel. The focus of my discussion is on the 10% who live in 90% of our landmass. Our 2020 research showed that approximately 200 Canadian communities receive scheduled air service from about 20 different airlines. Only about a third of these communities are served by mainline carriers. About one half have a population of less than 10,000, and almost 75% are served by just one airline. Of the approximately 300 scheduled domestic air routes in Canada, about 15% are competitive, with 5% served by competing mainline carriers, 9% served by competing mainline and regional carriers, and 1% served by competing regional carriers. All air routes in Canada were subject to economic regulation until 1987, and Air Canada was government-owned until 1988. Economic protection in the north was relaxed in 1996, and by 2005, Canada was fully deregulated. While deregulation has done great things for the majority of Canadian airline consumers, it's also led to a level of consolidation that may not have been anticipated. Prior to deregulation, Canadian Pacific Airlines operated from Vancouver, Pacific Western operated from Calgary, Transair operated from Winnipeg, Nordair and Quebec Air operated from Montreal, and Eastern Provincial operated from Halifax. All of these airlines provided regional services with modern large aircraft, and they provided significant economic benefits to their regions. In the post-deregulation environment, regional services have become consolidated and centralized, with many communities losing jet service in favor of turboprops and some communities losing service entirely. This risk was acknowledged in the 2000 TRAN Committee report dealing with the takeover of Canadian Airlines by Air Canada, with 2 of the 42 recommendations calling for mandatory interline and codeshare agreements between all Canadian scheduled airlines. This would serve to level the playing field between small regional carriers and large network carriers by providing regional carriers with access to mainline networks and thus 100% of the market rather than just a portion of the market. This dynamic has been addressed through legislation in both the telecommunications industry and the railroad industry. From a passenger standpoint, people traveling with 2 airlines that do not have an interline agreement travel on 2 different itineraries, resulting in a duplication of fees and taxes, an inability to check luggage to final destination, and limited passenger protection or accommodation if flights are delayed or canceled. These dynamics put regional community travelers at a distinct and needless disadvantage relative to other Canadians. With respect to pricing, in the long run, airfares are more significantly determined by costs than by competition or greed. Competition is important, but is only one factor in keeping airfares low, and it can actually be counterproductive in a small market. Our network is comprised of regional turboprop routes and gateway jet routes, and I'm sometimes asked why it costs almost twice as much to fly 500 miles from Whitehorse to Old Crow as it does to fly 1,000 miles south from Whitehorse to Vancouver. We utilize 40-passenger gravel runway-capable turboprop aircraft on our north routes and 120-plus seat jet aircraft on our gateway routes. The turboprops burn more fuel per seat to fly 500 miles than the jets burn per seat to fly 1,000 miles. And the price of fuel at our most northern turboprop stop is 47% higher than at our southernmost jet stop. Our total direct operating cost per seat for the north route to Old Crow is 137% higher than for the jet route to Vancouver. Because our turboprop routes are multi-stop with diminishing payloads on each northern stop, and because cargo is unidirectional, our turboprop load factors are on average more than 10% lower than those on our jet routes. And this, in combination with the DOC differential, creates a per-passenger DOC differential of almost 200%. The sharing of overhead costs, which speaks to economist Erickson's observation in our paper, reduces the overhead burden and thus the airfares on our regional routes by almost 20%, leaving a net average fare differential of about 88%. As a final note on pricing, our 2023 net percentage margin on our turboprop routes, where we have no competition, was less than on our jet routes, where we compete with both mainline carriers, and our overall margin for the year was less than 5%. In closing, in order to improve service and air travel pricing for northern and other regional communities, we need funding to modernize regional route and navigational infrastructure so that regional airlines can modernize their fleets and operate more efficiently, and we need regulation and/or policy that recognizes and protects the role of regional air carriers. We also need to better understand the cost and service challenges faced in regional air markets, and we need to reconsider Canada's user pay model, which does not reconcile with many, if not most, other countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sparling. Next, we'll go with Ms. DeCaria. I believe I pronounced it correctly that time. The floor is yours for your opening remarks. 5 minutes, please.
Good day, Honorable Chair, esteemed members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Shelley DeCaria, and I'm the President CEO of Canadian North, and with me is Nick Purich, our Chief Financial Officer. For over 75 years, we have been providing essential air transportation services to 25 communities in the Northwest Territories, Nunavut, and Nunavik, the northern region of Quebec. 21 of those communities are isolated from the rest of the country and do not have road access. Air transportation is the only reliable year-round way to move people, access food, and critical supplies, as well as medical and other vital services. Access to safe and reliable air transportation services is literally a lifeline for these communities. As a 100% Inuit-owned company, and as an Inuk myself, we truly understand the vital role air travel plays in these regions, and we are committed to ensuring that our services meet the needs of the communities that we serve. Operating an airline in the northern regions of Canada comes with unique challenges over and above those in the south. Extreme weather conditions, limited infrastructure, and vast distances significantly increase operational costs. These factors make it difficult for any airline to maintain frequent and reliable service while keeping prices affordable. The cost of providing air service in the north is inherently high. Fuel costs, maintenance, and the need for specialized equipment to operate in harsh climates and from short gravel runways all contribute to the overall expenses. We have also invested heavily in ensuring that our services are dependable, even under challenging conditions. This includes maintaining a fleet capable of handling extreme weather and ensuring that our staff are trained to meet the unique demands of northern operations. On top of that, the lower passenger volumes compared to the southern routes mean that costs per passenger are higher. Case in point, it is estimated that the total population of the 25 communities that we serve is around 130,000, roughly the size of Kelowna, BC, or Sherbrooke, Quebec. While we continuously strive to optimize our operations and reduce costs where possible, the economic realities of northern aviation cannot be overlooked. It isn't just enough to bring other airlines who generally focus on the larger, easier communities. More than a decade ago, Air Canada and WestJet began offering flights on the Edmonton to Yellowknife route. They introduced increased competition, which initially resulted in lower airfares. These major carriers leveraged their larger networks and economies of scale to offer competitive prices, attracting passengers who were previously served by smaller regional airlines. However, it also led to the significant challenges for smaller regional airlines, including financial strain, service reductions, and exits from the route, which in turn had complex and potentially negative long-term implications for market competition and community connectivity. Remember those 25 communities that I just spoke about? For years, our Yellowknife route helped subsidize those smaller, less profitable routes, which the other airlines refused to service. While the challenges are significant, there are ways to improve the situation. We welcome the opportunity to work with the government and other stakeholders to explore solutions that can enhance air travel in the north. Here are a potential few avenues that we can collaborate on. Government subsidies can help offset the high operational costs and make air travel more affordable for residents. There are similar programs in other essential services. Enhancing airport infrastructure can improve service reliability and efficiency. Investments in better facilities and equipment would enable more frequent and reliable flights. Regulatory adjustments that recognize the unique challenges of northern aviation could create a more favorable operating environment, encouraging both existing and new airlines to invest in the region. System-wide cost review to understand how the user pay model of aviation infrastructure funding in Canada impacts consumers. We at Canadian North are committed to collaborating with the government, communities, and other stakeholders to ensure that air travel in the north is not only viable, but thrives, supporting the economic and social well-being of all residents. Thank you for your time and the opportunity to speak here today. Honorable Chair, esteemed members, I am happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Decaria, for your opening remarks. Next, we will go to Mr. Gervais. Mr. Gervais, you have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. The floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup. J'aimerais remercier
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the committee for the invitation to appear before you today on such an important topic. I have been the Executive Director of the Northern Air Transport Association, better known as NATA, since the end of January 2024. I'd like to make it clear that I'm not an expert in competition law, nor am I employed by any of our carriers. I serve our association. In fact, several of our members will be testifying here for this today. So you therefore have the opportunity to hear details and the realities to which they are exposed.
47 years ago to support the economic development of northern and remote Canada with safe and sustainable air transportation. Northern air carriers are not the largest in Canada, but they do provide an essential service to the largest proportion of Canada's landmass and to many communities that have no road access and/or are not served by mainline carriers. NATA's mission is to represent northern and remote air carriers in the decision-making process affecting transportation in northern and remote regions of Canada. Our goals, as in associations, are to promote a safe and effective northern and remote air transportation system, to advocate northern and remote air transport positions, to establish and maintain partnerships with industry, governments, and other interested parties. Our main objectives are twofold: to develop and cause to be adopted positions which increase the safety of northern air transportation and reflect the unique operating environment, and develop and cause to be adopted positions that improve the economics, quality, and delivery of northern air transportation, considering this particular environment.
NATA is a network of 81 members made up of 33 carriers supported and accompanied in their mission by 48 other members. Our 33 carriers own a total of 650 aircrafts, which is more than the combined number held by Air Canada, 254, Jazz, and WestJet, and Porter. I mentioned NATA's mission and objectives earlier because it is essential to mention that they are the common thread that binds us all our members, whoever they may be. They are united by our goals and mission, and these elements are vital to the communities our members serve. I'd also like to take a moment to mention that our 33 carriers hold a mix of operating certificates, including 13 air transport, 15 commuter, and 29 air cab, so we can meet a wide range of needs.
Which would be, for many, considered essential. They form a network, an essential system which in itself is more than the sum of its parts. When a bigger carrier goes into a hard surface airport, connects with a smaller carrier or aircraft that ends up on a gravel runway or in a float plane on a lake, all these connecting points by same-minded members are essential for the citizens and for the end users, either for medical reasons, commodities, or other essential necessities.
While our members serve northern and remote communities with a mission of essential service to themselves and their customers, they are subject to the same regulations and limitations as other carriers in the country. What's more, they face challenges that are not encountered in the South, such as more complex access to maintenance, deficient weather services, the complexity of refueling at certain locations, runways in a state of disrepair, and out of the ordinary weather phenomena due to climate change.
Modernization or revitalization. The user pay system will not suffice for that, nor would any program not specifically aimed towards those needs. Aviation is not a luxury, it's a necessity for thousands of Canadian citizens across vast swaths of provinces and territories. An essential mode of transportation that should be considered as such, especially in the regions that we serve. When dozens of communities can only be reached by air, those vital services are their lifeline to the world, and it's everyone's duty to keep it and sustain it. Merci. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Gervais.
Thank you, Mr. Gervais.
Mayor Attrell, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, please.
Thank you very much. First of all, I am grateful for this opportunity to appear. I'm in my home office on the unceded territory of the Wet'suwet'en First Nation, and I'm grateful to be here. I'm feeling a little, I must say, daunted by the professionals who have come before, so I'm going to just speak about my community and the importance of air travel and why I think some regulation might help. Smithers is a town in central British Columbia, 5,400 people, so what has been said previously affects what I'm thinking about. Our airport is very accessible, 5 minutes from downtown. It has a good runway, 7,500 feet, can land major aircraft and has done, and it is a critical piece of the transportation that makes our community healthy. Currently, Air Canada serves our airport. It's not the same every day. Some days 2 flights a day, some days 1, and we are really grateful for that service. Pre-pandemic, we had more service per day, and regional carrier Central Mountain Air. sort of reflecting on the circumstance of this community and why I think air transport, air access, and fair pricing are so important to us. Before the pandemic, we were able to operate our airport like a business. There was enough traffic and enough money coming into the airport. The municipality owns it, I should say that. So we were able to consider it like a self-paying business. So now, a couple of years out of the pandemic, we've returned to about 75% of pre-pandemic revenue and 85% of passengers. So we're definitely still recovering. We've done the research to know that our airport is one of the lower cost airports for aircraft to come into. We do what we can to be competitive. Who uses our airport and why we need it? Like many other communities, it's used by residents for leisure travel, business travel, medical and emergency travel. We have a solid business to the northwest of us where industry uses the airport for shuttling, and there's a good charter business that comes out of the airport. Also, in the face of climate change and wildfire in the last few years, we have a wildfire base at the airport, and emergency aircraft can be staged there, and we've actually been able to house people at the airport when needed, when there was a real shortage of accommodation for firefighters. I would say that airport is absolutely essential to the health of this community. We've done our part, as I've said, keeping good investment in the airport and the taxiways, the terminal, etc. We've made good use of the funding that the federal government provides. Just down the road from us, and in northern terms, people understand this, so about a 2.5-hour drive, is the Terrace-Kitimat Airport that's served by two carriers, Air Canada and WestJet. And this is one of the keys, I think, in pricing fairness, is that, and I did a scan this morning of prices, so Smithers is generally priced higher, and it was random, I just picked days in the future. Smithers is generally priced higher than Terrace, and the air miles are very similar. So if the air miles are similar and the aircraft are similar, I heard that earlier, generally Q400s are flown. When the miles are similar for Smithers, Terrace, and Prince Rupert, it is hard to understand how the pricing is consistently lower. And what that means is that our residents and businesses are making decisions on where to locate, and that affects the overall health of the community. And rural communities are facing enough challenges. When residents are forced to drive, I guess they're not forced, but one sees the difference in pricing for families, for people moving students to universities, they're making those decisions to travel to another airport, sometimes in the winter when it's dangerous. So I believe that regulation can help. It's about considering what is a fair price per mile when the aircraft is the same, we're at about the same part of the country, in order to provide this economic benefit, economic stability to important communities, and we're all important across these corridors. I'm sorry, I forgot to start my timer, so I'm going to hope for the best here.
You have 45 seconds left,
all right,
Mayor.
Then I will be quick. So I think what we're looking for is regulation that provides fair competition. We're looking for the airlines to be successful. We realize there's a challenge, but our communities need to have fair, equitable access to air travel. It is critical for the health of our communities and the health of our citizens, and that's the regulation I'm urging you to consider. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor Attrell. Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur Côté. Monsieur Côté, la parole.
And now, Mr. Côté, over to you for 5 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the committee, thank you for giving us the opportunity to comment today on this important issue, which is regional air transport. Please allow me state that for over 100 years, the UMQ has been bringing together local governments from all regions of Quebec to mobilize municipal expertise, support its members, and exercise their powers and promote municipal democracy. Our members represent over 85% of Quebec's population and territory, and would like to talk about the importance of regional transport. This is an essential service to the occupation of the territory and development of Quebec and its regions. Currently, regional air transport in Quebec is grappling with a number of challenges, and to fully understand the situation, it's important to review a few key facts. Before 2020, Air Canada had a held a virtual monopoly on regional services, and this quasi-monopoly guaranteed reliable service but at high ticket prices for customers. The pandemic then caused a drastic drop in demand for regional flights. In June 2020, Air Canada announced the suspension of 8 regional services in Quebec. Of these, 5 were suspended permanently and 3 temporarily. For a territory that boasts 15 regional airports, this announcement created major shockwave. Since then, Air Canada's presence in the regions has diminished. Today, 6 carriers share service to Quebec's regional airports in addition to Air Canada. These are small players with a few and a limited number of aircrafts. This situation has created new challenges for ensuring reliable and affordable service. In this matter, we deplore the absence of the federal government, even though air transport is first and foremost within its jurisdiction. For now, I'd like to present 3 major challenges to air transport in Quebec. The first one is the insufficient service provided. Delays are frequent and sometimes flights are cancelled. What's more, schedules are not meeting users' needs, making regional air transport less attractive. In order to improve the situation, our first recommendation is to increase the federal government's involvement and prioritize the improvement of regional air service. If the federal government acknowledges the importance of railway lines and invests significant amounts annually in order to ensure affordable service every year, we believe that air transport equally deserves the same amount of attention, because certain areas in Canada are not do not have access to air transport services. Now, the second challenge concerns affordability and the high cost of tickets. Although financial incentives from the Quebec government and increased competition between smaller carriers have improved the situation since 2020, the balance remains fragile. The closure of an additional carrier could completely destabilize the market. The UMQ, along with several major partners such as the Alliance de l'Industrie Touristique du Québec, the Conseil du Patronat du Québec, and the Fédération des Chambres du Commerce du Québec, is proposing to migrate from the current model of free competition to a regulated competitive model using private carriers. This new model would allow for free competition on calls for tender while maintaining oversight by a management body. In this way, each region would be able to participate in the restructuring of calls for tender so that air service really corresponds to its specific needs. This change of model would require legislative changes at a federal level and increased collaboration with the provincial level. The third topical issue concerns the services provided by NAVCAN, the organization that manages control towers for the federal government, and indeed, the shortage of manpower has led to a reduction in the services offered by NAV Canada, which translates into either occasional service disruptions or by providing remote services from another airport. This has operational impacts on the airports concerned. Federal government therefore must guarantee the continuity and efficiency of air traffic control services at regional airports in collaboration with NAV Canada, as well as finance NAV Canada rather than shed the cost over to the consumers. Finally, it is crucial to emphasize the need for massive investment in airport infrastructure and to maintain and improve and expand our regional airport infrastructures. Significant investment is essential. In addition, the reference amounts for the purchase of mobile equipment does not truly reflect the cost of this equipment, which has increased in cost since the pandemic and since the waves of inflation that we've all experienced. And with all of this, we think air transport will be improved across Quebec. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you, Mr. Cote. Your timing is perfect, and it is very much appreciated.
You have 6 minutes for your questioning, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to thank the witnesses for coming today and for presenting information on this very, very important study. Before we begin our line of questioning, Mr. Chair, I have a few other items that I wanted to raise. And last week we had the Minister of Housing here, Minister of Housing and Infrastructure appear before committee. And during that appearance, he committed to provide this committee with a copy of a resignation letter of Ms. Andrée Lise Method, who was a director of the Canada Infrastructure Bank and who is facing investigations with regard to her role at the Sustainable Development Technology Canada, SDTC. and the inappropriate use of taxpayer dollars to financially benefit companies she had connections to. As you know, the minister informed us that Ms. Method had tendered her resignation as of April 16th. I'd like to know if the minister or the Canada Infrastructure Bank has provided the resignation letter or the official documentation confirming her resignation.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. I've spoken with the clerk, and the clerk has informed us that we have not received that documentation.
Okay, in that regard, Mr. Chair, in light of that revelation, I'd like to table here today a notice of motion to get to the bottom of the allegations of corruption around the Sustainable Development Technology Canada, also known as the Green Slush Fund, and how one of its directors ended up appointed to the board of the Canada Infrastructure Bank. My motion is as follows. Given that A, Sustainable Development Technologies Canada, a $1 billion taxpayer fund, is under investigation by the Auditor General and the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner. B, a former director of the fund, Andre Lee's Method, helped to send multiple companies in which she has a financial interest millions of dollars, and despite this, the government appointed her as a director to the Canada Infrastructure Bank. Pursuant to the Standing Order 1081A, the committee order that the Canada Infrastructure Bank to provide the committee within 7 days of the adoption of this motion, A, the resignation letter of Andre Lee's Method, B, a comprehensive and detailed summary of the projects and the funds that she oversaw during her time on the CIB board, C, any internal communications regarding or relating to her resignation from the board, and pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee call the following witnesses to testify before the committee for no less than 2 hours each. Andre Lee's Method, founder and managing partner of Cycle Canada. Jane Huntley, PCO Director of Appointments. Dominic LeBlanc, Minister of Public Safety, Democratic Institutions and Intergovernmental Affairs. And Aaron Corey, CEO of the Canada Infrastructure Bank. We will send a copy of this motion, Chair, to the clerk for the translation and distribution to the members of the committee. And I thank you for this opportunity, and I cede the rest of my time to my colleague, Mr. Davidson.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lewis. Mr. Davidson.
And time left, Mr. Chair, just before.
You have 2 minutes and 42 seconds, sir.
2 minutes and 42 seconds. So much to talk about in 2 minutes, but I'm just going to start firing them at you. If you can keep your answers short, that'd be great. I'm going to focus, I heard 3 words from all of you, actually. You all said this: lifeline, essential, critical. Thanks for standing up for rural Canada, because it is essential that we service rural Canadians. I wonder, Shelley, do you know a number that your company has spent on carbon tax in the last year for jet fuel? I see your CFOs here. You may be able to pull that or not.
Do you have a number? No.
We don't have a specific number available for the committee on this.
Okay, because fuel prices from carriers that I've talked to have become very concerning for the North. And the prices of getting up, I think, I think it's important for people on this committee to understand. Fuel is even transported by plane, if I'm correct on that. I think Air Quebec just might have retired to ATR 72s. They're trying to put a hawker online with bladder tanks to transport fuel, and it becomes a very huge barrier to companies that want to answer. And the carbon tax right through the supply chain is driving up the price of Jet A. And why does that matter to rural Canadians? Because they are bearing the brunt of that and paying more money. So I wonder if you could talk about the effects of fuel prices on your business.
Certainly. Fuel is one of the most significant expenses that we face in our operation on a day-to-day basis. Similar to the comments from Mr. Sparling, I acknowledge it's a very low margin business, so any cost that's imposed on the airline, whether it's a tax on fuel or otherwise, ultimately does have to be borne by the consumer, the traveling public.
Okay, thanks. Another concern of mine, especially throughout the pandemic, and it's still going out now, that big carriers didn't face, that smaller carriers faced, and flight schools, with 40% increase in the public service by this Liberal government, we had Transport Canada that couldn't turn medicals. I had flight schools closing. I wonder if you could talk about pilot shortages now that we're facing and the inefficiencies of Transport Canada to turn those medicals, how that may have affected pilot training.
As I understand at this point, the issue with medicals has improved. However, pilot shortage does remain a significant issue in our industry. We face about 4 times higher turnover than we would have pre-pandemic. Our Vice President of Flight Operations consistently indicates that the new normal is sort of 4 times the training, all of which cost must be borne by the traveler. And I see my red flag.
Is that's to vote no?
No, this is newly introduced, just to give everybody a heads up that the time is up, colleagues. Thank you, sir. Next, we'll go online to Mr. Hanley. Mr. Hanley, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you so much. And first of all, I want to thank my committee colleagues from all around the table for allowing this important study to happen. And I'm grateful for the chance also to sit temporarily in this chair on your committee, not being a permanent member, but very grateful for the opportunity to bring some important, really to highlight some of the important aspects of northern and remote air travel and how we can assist as a federal government to continue to ensure that northern air carriers thrive. I'm going to concentrate my questions with you, Mr. Sparling, Joe, not surprisingly. And one way I want to start, Mayor Attrell just spoke very eloquently about the connection between community well-being and regional air travel. Air North is a significant local employer in the Yukon, and I wondered if you could just talk about how important, with the growth of Air North over the last couple of decades, how important it sits as a local employer and how important that is to the community.
Well,
Sorry, my sincere apologies, Mr. Sparling and Mr. Hanley. I have a point of order here, so we're going to stop the clock.
I just believe that Mayor Attrell lost her connection, and I noticed her video was frozen. I wonder if we could just take a moment to see if she was able to reconnect. Apologies to Mr. Hanley.
If it's okay for colleagues here, we'll just hold it there. Mr. Hanley, you're only at 1 minute and 21 seconds, so you've got 4 minutes, 40 seconds left, sir, and we'll turn it over to you, Mr. Sparling, in just a second. I'm going to let the clerk work with our AV team here to ensure we can reconnect the mayor.
I thought maybe Mr. Hanley's question was going to be through to Ms. Attrell or Mayor Attrell, so my apologies for interrupting there, Brendan.
Not at all. Thank you for pointing that out. We'll try and get her back on as quickly as possible. Mr. Hanley, we're going to let you decide whether or not you'd like to proceed in the absence of the mayor for the time being.
Given overall time that we have, I would be happy to proceed.
So we'll make sure to try and get the mayor back before you're up again. So we'll let you continue. Mr. Sparling, I'll turn the floor back over to you, sir, if you want to answer Mr. Hanley's question.
Okay, well, we're talking about local economic development, and in the past, most northern communities, using the territorial capitals as an example, or in our market, Whitehorse, were served as northern outposts at the end of in a typical hub and spoke route network. And in a hub and spoke network, the cash flows from the spoke into the hub. And in our operation, we've been able to turn that around by making Whitehorse a hub. And that's produced significant local economic benefits, the most significant of which is employment. We employ between 12 and 14 full-time equivalent northerners per 100 scheduled service departures. Our mainline competitors employ 1 to 2, so the employment payback is about tenfold. The other thing that it does is by making Whitehorse a hub, we share overhead costs between our regional routes that go north of Whitehorse and our gateway routes that go south of Whitehorse. And as I mentioned in my paper, we estimate that that's allowed us to keep regional airfares about 20% lower than they otherwise would be. The other observation is price-stimulated travel. I think that by providing affordable airfares to Yukoners to travel in and out of the territory, it makes the Yukon a better place to live and work. And the year before we started our jet service, the total market size was about 100,000 enplanements and deplanements. Last year it was better than 400,000. And airfares were over $300 before we started. They were closer to $200 per sector last year. We see people, using our own kids as an example for sports travel. It used to be a bus trip up or down the Alaska Highway in the middle of winter. Now we see Yukon kids every weekend going south, Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary, Kelowna to play hockey. We've got one Yukon kid in the NHL, and we've got more Yukon kids going to university because they can come back and forth affordably. All of these things add up to make the northern communities, a better place to live and work. And I think that affordable air travel is a big piece of that.
Joe, thanks for that. And I'm going to just perhaps interrupt. There's one point I wanted to make just on my colleague Mr. Davidson's previous intervention about carbon pricing. Carbon pricing, at least in the Yukon, I believe in Nunavut, I'm not sure about other areas of Canada, does not apply to aviation in the Yukon. We recognize, however, that there are many factors that are escalating fuel costs. In the Yukon, carbon pricing is not one of them. But Joe, back to you. I wanted to talk about reconciliation. The Air North is actually 49% owned by Vantat Gwich'in First Nation from Oak Crow. That's been a really, I think, important element of providing service to Northern First Nation communities and enhancing that connectedness. And in the spirit of reconciliation, I wonder if you can talk about how important the stability of Air North as a regional carrier is to promoting reconciliation.
Well, reconciliation is a mandate of both levels of government, and I think the investment by the Vantat Gwich'in in Air North, and certainly Canadian North is First Nation owned as well. And I think that that's a reality of business in the North now. First Nations are an emerging force in the Northern economy. I think the partnership with the Vantat Gwich'in First Nation, more than 20 years now, has been very successful. It's a bit of I regard it as a bit of a showcase example of how First Nations can and will participate in northern economies. The logic behind the First Nations investment, I remember it well, was not entirely about returns on their investment. It was about preserving service for their community of Old Crow. It was about investing for future generations, having some say and control in the airline, sharing in the success if there was success. And I think that logic has now applied to many First Nation investments across the North.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hanley, and thank you, Mr. Sparling. Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur Barcelou-Duval. À vous la parole.
And now, Mr. Barcelou-Duval, over to you for 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses here today with us. This is a study that is very important for me, the issue of air transport, regional air transport. I think it took us, sound is back. I think it took us as a committee a lot of time before we arrived at a study on this topic of such importance, which we've discussed at length and which we should have discussed much earlier. Now, I'd like to apologize to all the witnesses because I don't have a lot of time, and there's many of you. Some of you I might not have the chance to ask you a question. So I'll start with Mr. Cote from the UMQ. The government of Quebec put in place working group on regional air transport. It was like a crisis committee where different government entities were represented, and many other stakeholders. All of those were involved in the air transport sector. But if I'm not mistaken, the federal government is not part of the people sitting around this table. On April 28, 2023, I saw an article from CBC Radio which talked about the fact that UMQ deplores or condemns the state of regional air transport. When the new Minister of Transport who was appointed, he was appointed last fall, I reported that there was a willingness on the part of cities and Quebec for government to be one of the stakeholders around the table, because this is something that concerns everyone. Now, I'd like to know, this article that was put out in April 2023, and following my discussion with the minister last fall, has this problem been resolved as of now? Well, I met with the minister last week with very few commitments. In fact, I don't feel that there's a certain interest on the part of government to take care of regional air transport in Quebec. Elsewhere in the country, I don't know, but in Quebec, I don't feel that there's a sense of concern for this essential service, which is part of the federal government's jurisdiction. So they didn't give you a specific reason for the absence of the federal government at that table. It was not just the UMQ that deplored the absence of the federal government. Well, what we can note is the absence of government, and the only thing I've heard from them is criticisms with regard to the fact to the move by the government of Quebec and what they're doing as airport administrators. Regional air transport is not a municipal competence or provincial competence, except for economic development, which is covered by the Quebec government. But I can still note that the federal government is absent from this table. Thank you. And this takes me somewhere else, because in your statement earlier, you talked about the user payer model, which other speakers have made mention of in their opening statements. And we've discussed the high cost and the lack of competition for air transport. We're not talking about regional air transport, but transportation in general. We also mentioned the fact that in our Canadian model, the freight costs, the safety cost, as well as the taxes and cost of renting airport infrastructure. So there are many of those costs that are involved, which makes it such that the air ticket costs very high. And elsewhere across the world, there are other countries using different models where we don't have a 100% user payer model, where there's part of the funding that comes from the state in order to support the air transport sector. So when you decide to not provide subsidies or incentivize the sector, and I understand these policies, but to tell people from regions, well, organize yourselves, do you think this is a normal approach from the federal government? Well, regional services and other witnesses discussed this earlier. This is an essential service in our regions. This is how regions are connected to services, health services, and other education services. And that is how you equally access the tourism potential of the country. And every essential service deserves minimum attention from the state. And we use an essential service as a way of providing, filling in the state's coffers instead of being supported. We provide about $181 million annually in terms of this investments in the train, in the railway sector, and there's nothing that is invested in air transport. About $400 million annually spent through the tariffs that you mentioned, and all of this is brought into the consolidated fund of the state, which is not used in order to provide better service to the population. So this is contrary to the policies that we would expect, and we understand that this is an essential move to support the railway service. But does the train service go everywhere in the country? No. So I think we traveled, for instance, I traveled 13 hours to get here this morning, for instance. Well, and the train doesn't even go to your region anymore. It used to be the case So when we talk about the user payer model, there's some costs which the federal government is responsible for, NAV Canada, the safety costs, as well as taxes. These are all costs which we could decide, for instance, the federal government could decide and say, well, in order to assist the air transport sector, we will change the way they operate, will absorb some of these costs in order to make sure that there's some form of balance. Are there any initiatives that have been thought about from the municipalities in Quebec? The Quebec municipalities have suggested to control this regional market through a public call for tender system. And they would reflect on their needs and then do a bidding system, and then competition will come into play and to establish lines with the different carriers. And I can see that we're being told that our time is up. Thank you, Mr. Cote. Thank you, Mr. Barcelou Duval.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for joining this study. This is something that those of us who represent rural ridings have been looking forward to for some time, and I want to especially thank my colleague, Mr. Hanley, for persisting on this study and ensuring that we get to this very important topic. And it's wonderful that the mayor of my home community, Mayor Attrell, is here to join us. And we're also joined in the room by Mayor Sarah Story from the village of Fraser Lake. And both of these rural mayors, like rural mayors all across Canada, know just how vital transportation is to the quality of life in our communities. And that's why I've been so passionate about passenger transportation, whether it's buses or passenger rail or affordable air travel for northern citizens. So I'll start with Mayor Attrell, and you really covered a lot of ground in your opening statement, but I'm curious about the competitors that have tried to enter the Smithers market. I know that you've talked to these companies, and we'd love to have them at committee to present their story and the challenges that they face. But what have you heard in your conversations with smaller companies that have tried to compete head-to-head and serve the local market with affordable airfare?
Yeah, thanks, MP Backrack. I appreciate the question, and I'm sorry for dropping out of the meeting. I had a connectivity issue, so I'm happy to be back. I think what we hear is that there's depth in the big carriers. And so when we have had smaller regional airlines that have come in, and there have been very good ones, including one that is based in Smithers, Central Mountain Air has its head office here, and yet is unable to maintain service in and out of this airport. And it relates to matching schedules and sometimes deeper cuts to fares, and then combine that with loyalty programs that the major carriers have, and it becomes untenable for the smaller carriers. So in our case, the regional carriers still provide charter service to industrial projects out of here. They are able to take use of the airport, but it doesn't involve scheduled passenger service. And so I've heard others talk about the critical nature of these airports, and it is critical. In this day and age, people have to have access to travel. So if smaller carriers can't make it, we suffer because people will make those decisions. We have also talked in a very limited way to another major carrier, but I'm not sure there's enough room for two major carriers into this airport, but there is definitely room for a regional carrier. And when the flights are here, the flights are full. I think that's the other piece. When there aren't flights available, people travel down the road, or when the prices are deep enough to attract them to drive down the road. But the airplanes are full. So if the airplanes weren't full, I would feel differently about it, but the flights are full.
Attrell, I wonder if you could expand on the impact of air travel on the local economy. I know you talked to existing local businesses as well as prospective investors. What are they telling you about the importance of affordable airfares into the Smithers Airport?
If the airfares aren't affordable, they're not going to be here, and those decisions are being made. Again, our closest airport is 2.5 hours down the road. In terms of access to industrial opportunity in northwestern British Columbia, one airport is the same as the other. We've spent a lot of time making this a very livable community, but at the end of the day, if the costs are enough different, people will make those decisions. So be it tourism businesses who have made a decision to fly into a different airport because there's more, the prices are better for their customers. And then in terms of industrial companies, they make that decision as well. And there is a cascade effect. So if a large business chooses to move down the road, the services that go with that business also move down the road. And I am told that is directly related to the services at our airport, frequency and fare. So the health of the community relies in part and in a significant part on the type of access we have to air seats and air prices. They have to be reasonable, or this company feels it across the board. Community, rather, not company, this community.
Thank you, Mayor Attrell. How have your conversations with Air Canada gone? I know you meet with them periodically and have frequently brought up this issue, as I did when I was mayor of Smithers. How would you characterize those conversations?
Friendly but unmoved. I think they're willing to hear me. I don't think that we in any way affect the decision making. So it's friendly and without result, I would have to say. They're willing to pick up the phone, but there is no change in action. They explain the situation that, there is competition down the road. They have to meet that competition. And also they know that Smithers passengers are driving down the road, so they get the passengers anyway. So I think from the perspective of the airline, they're having their needs met. And they are still flying here, so I don't want to be too critical, but I don't think they're motivated to improve the service here unless there is a competitive airline, and then they come in and they increase their service. So,
my last question, Mayor Attrell, and I might get cut off, but it seems like there are a number of different proposed solutions. One of the solutions is that the federal government invests more in regional airports and drives down the cost for the airlines, with the assumption that the airlines are going to pass those savings on to the passengers. The other proposal is that the solution that's been pursued in Quebec, whereby the provincial government directly subsidizes rural routes and sets a cap on the amount of the airfare with a subsidy to the airlines. I'm just wondering which regulatory approach you would recommend the federal government pursue.
I don't know, Mr. Bachrach, if I have my heart set on a type of regulation. I think from a community perspective, the overriding concern is that there is fair and equitable access to air travel for residents and for those coming out of the business, industrial, and emergency sectors. We need to know that the prices are fair, that people are not motivated to drive down the road. So I would perhaps I should have thought about that more, but I would leave the decision on what type of regulation. But I encourage you to recommend a regulation that enables these small communities with smaller regional airports to survive and thrive. It is essential to maintaining good business in the rural communities.
For your forbearance there. You can take it off my next round if you...
Only because, Mr. Bachrach, you have been so forceful in making sure that Timmins was well represented in this committee. We provided you with that extra 40 seconds. Smithers, excuse me.
Timmins is also a great community.
I just want to say this to the mayor who's watching, and I say this on behalf of all members here. You have somebody here who on any given day will bring up Smithers and make sure that there's some form of reference to Smithers. So, yeah, exactly.
Just for the record, Fraser Lake.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bachrach. I will turn the floor over now to Mr. Davidson. The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And, then I got to talk about the Soup and Salad Bowl of Canada in York Simcoe. And to my colleague from the Yukon, I can assure you, if you're eating carrots in the Yukon from the Soup and Salad Bowl of Canada, you're paying the carbon tax all the way there, right through the supply chain. Okay, so getting back to fuel, because I think it is one of the largest next to labor costs that regional carriers face, and I'm going to talk about Timmins because obviously I'm from Ontario, and maybe this relates to you about fuel shortages at airports and smaller airports not having fuel. And why does that matter? And why does that matter to my colleagues now? Because of the costs, we're seeing airports not selling fuel, and this relates to infrastructure. I know that now we have a variety of airports with NDBs being decommissioned, localizer back courses only, no ILS approaches. Our minimums are 600, 800 feet. GPS approaches aren't approved at some of these airports. So you have aircraft leaving with extra fuel now and can't take bags. I wonder if you could tell us about that.
Thank you for the question. I'm going to use Kikittakchuak. The communities that you guys are talking about actually have road access. Mine don't. So it heavily impacts how many people we can actually, how many people we can bring into the community, how much cargo we can bring into the community. Kikittakchuak hasn't had fuel quality assurance since December. So we've had to take extra fuel from Iqaluit in order to land there, which bumps bags, which bumps passengers. We are an essential service. So this has heavily impacted not only, I think there's been 5 since December that we have had no fuel in those communities. Did you want to add to that?
In addition, you referenced some of the navigational infrastructure, and reliable access to air navigation is not consistent across the northern communities we serve. That may mean a further away alternate has to be selected, which may mean more fuel is carried, fewer passengers, fewer bags are carried. All of those issues compound the lack of availability a community may face due to fuel, due to infrastructure reliability.
No, thanks for that. And this is due, part of this, I watched the federal government, and just to relate it to Southern Ontario, we just had Buttonville closed. We should almost have a moment of silence for that airport closing. That was the 5th busiest airport in Canada, as well as jets not being allowed into the island airport. Now we have Downsview closed. And, that relates back to Air Atlantic, Air BC, that was trying to be a regional carrier out of Buttonville Airport. Their alternate was Montreal. And the minimums were down to 600 feet only, and there was no extensions. So getting back to, we'll say, pilot shortages, which I think everyone here would agree is affecting aviation now. How about mechanics? I've talked to many airlines. There's a shortage now of mechanics. And I wonder about, we have what we look at as a blue seal recognizing foreign credentials. I wonder if that would be something that would help your industry. Mr. Spalding or Mr. There he is. You might as well get in on this.
Sorry, we must have lost internet service here, but your question was about shortage of maintenance personnel, is that correct?
And pilots and, the lack of recognizing foreign credentials, red tape to speed things up.
Well, I think the labor shortage is industry-wide, not only and really goes across multiple industries. We've been relatively fortunate on the pilot front, and we are fully staffed on the maintenance front. But we're seeing, when we tender for jobs, we're not getting a lot of resumes. And I think that one of the issues that's been cited is the foreign worker program changes. I think that were made to the program, perhaps with the best of intentions, have produced some unintended consequences that are impacting aviation directly on the maintenance front. We hear that from our MRO service provider.
Yeah, it is a highly technical and sort of traceable qualification, and we could speed that up with less red tape, and recognizing foreign credentials in a more expedient manner would definitely help relieve some of the stresses that we do see on that. I would tend to think. Would you agree with that? Correct, yes. Okay. Getting back, I guess, municipally, and I get to talk about, is that a red flag?
It is a red flag.
Unbelievable. I have so much to say, Mr. Chair.
I'm sure you'll have another opportunity, sir. It's a red card. It is a red card. Thank you very much, Mr. Davidson. Next, we'll go back to Mr. Hanley. Mr. Hanley, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much. And I will go back to Joe, to Mr. Sparling. And I really want to use this time to focus on, given that this is about the Competition Act, this study is about the Competition Act as it applies to regional airlines, and really try to get into some policy recommendations. Now, you did submit, Joe, an accompanying paper by Fred Lazar, pretty long, pretty technical, but it really goes into some of the issues around competition with mainline carriers and the potential benefits of interline agreements. I wondered if you could maybe summarize where we could be going in terms of fostering, supporting interline agreements to support viability of smaller regional airlines.
Well, I think the key to success for regional service is not bringing in more big guys, but rather it's making sure that the little guys can compete. and interline agreements is just one way of accomplishing that. That was recommended in the 2000 TRAN report, where the consolidation was foreseen, and one of the ways that to alleviate that or to address that would be to mandatory interline agreements would let the little guys compete better. Now, to Mayor Attrell's situation in Smithers, if CMA had an ability to better compete with Air Canada through interline agreements, use of frequent flyer programs, and all of those things, that would probably create an optimum situation for your community, not to replace Air Canada, but to augment, to provide the level of competitive service that you're looking for. And those things have been addressed already in telecommunications and the railroad industry. So I think aviation needs to look at policies and/or regulation that can somehow make it easier for small players to survive. And when I reviewed what the Competition Act's all about, that's one of the 4 mandates, is creating an opportunity for equitable competitive participation by small and medium-sized entities. So I think that's the direction that we have to move towards.
What you said reminds me of a conversation that we've had. I know you've stated before about the win-win possibility that this is not necessarily taking away from, say, Air Canada's opportunities. That having kind of full both and I think the pandemic maybe illustrated some of that during some of that experience. There is the ability to keep both airlines full and kind of complementing each other in terms of service. I wonder if you could maybe talk about that.
Well, absolutely. As Shelley pointed out, the big carriers have no interest in going to the smallest of communities, but they do have an interest in going to what we'll call the northern hubs. And that's probably where we're at a little bit of disagreement with them. And I think there's a win-win situation for the regional carriers to be feeding the mainline carriers, but more so in the southern gateways than in the northern hubs. And I can certainly understand why they're perhaps reticent to welcome new competitors, if you want to call it that, because throughout their history, every time there's a new competitor start up, I've got 2 airplanes this year and I'm going to have 20 next year, and the only place they're going to get business is out of the prime east-west routes. And I think what we have to do is a better job of convincing the big guys that we're not out to cut their grass. If growth was a priority for Air North, we would not be based in the Yukon. We'd be based in the south. So there absolutely is a win-win scenario out there, but we haven't been able to make a good case for it, and that's where some cleverly crafted policy may be helpful in that regard, and it would create a better situation for regional air service as well as for all of the carriers. It wouldn't be to anybody's detriment.
Yeah, thank you for that. And maybe shortly, I only have a few seconds left, but if there's one sort of take-home point that you'd like this committee to remember in recommendations, maybe I'll give you 10 seconds to do that.
Well, in general, the thought is we got to have more competition, but bringing in more big players, and in the big scheme, some of them are international players, does not always produce optimal results. And look at Canadians right now, where consumers are paying too much for groceries, too much for fuel, too much for cell service, yet the providers of those goods and services, which are often large and often multinational corporations, are making record profits. We have to... There's a role for the smaller players in Canada. We're a small market, and the small players need to survive. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sparling, and thank you, Mr. Hanley. Prochainement, nous avons Mr. Barcelou-Duval. À vous la parole.
And now, Mr. Barcelou-Duval, over to you for 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. To carry on where I stopped earlier, I would like to take a few steps back and look at the pandemic programs, and people would understand why. During the pandemic, the Quebec government put in place the support program for regional air carriers. And this program, the intention of this program was to ensure that we have continued service, air travel service in the region. And the federal government, on its part, put in place a program which was supposed to be to provide essential air transport to distant areas, and there was a communique to that effect in 2020. And the information document that came with it was that there were about 182 communities which, according to them, were considered as remote communities. And when we look at the list of those communities, many of them are found in Quebec when I looked at the list. And these were essentially areas where there was no road network, I agree that we want to think of remote areas as places where the road network is not well developed. And thank God that in Quebec we had another program which allowed some form of help to come in. We had Deputy Minister for Transportation a few weeks back, and we asked him whether the regional air transport is an essential service. We're not able to get him to admit that. And today we voted a budget to visit those regions, and we didn't visit many of those regions in Quebec that are concerned. And of course, my question to you, which is a bit long-winded, do we still need air travel when we're about 10 hours by road or 900 kilometers from a city like Montreal? Does it then become an essential service, or do we not need it? It is an essential service. Even if there's a road network, even if the train can get there, sometimes the air travel mode is essential. For a region like mine, I'm from Gaspé. Gaspé is 700 kilometers away from Quebec, which is even further from Montreal. And as I mentioned, to get here, I had to travel by road for 13 hours. Why? Because the train service is not available, and it would have taken me 48 hours otherwise. So the service is defective. So you have to take your car and hit the road. This is an essential service to connect our regions to the major cities. It is essential for economic players so that they can drive development in the economic areas. And I think it is an essential service, especially when there's a certain distance that is between you and the major cities. Thank you. Mr. Bachrach, over to you.
Mr. Chair, and again, this is a really important conversation, and it's great to see everyone so engaged. I was going to ask a policy question to Mr. Sparling, but first I'll just note I've had a chance to fly with your airline a couple times because the northernmost communities in Skeena-Bulkley Valley are accessed most efficiently through Whitehorse. And chatting to passengers on board Air North, it's amazing just how passionate Yukoners are about your service. They're great ambassadors for Air North. So I hope to fly with you again in a few weeks when I visit Lower Post for the opening of their new community building. On the policy front, you've been really articulate around interline agreements and code shares and how that can benefit the affordability of Northern Air Service. I wonder about these other policies that other jurisdictions are pursuing. So in the United States, my understanding is that the government essentially puts rural routes or regional routes up for auction, and airlines bid on them based on what they feel they can provide the service for. We also have the situation in Quebec, which I understand involves a cap on fares to regional airports, and as well as a federal subsidy. Do you feel like, and then there's the option that the federal government invests heavily in airports in the hope that airlines pass those savings on to consumers. Do you feel like these policies are complementary, or are there other policies that, in addition to interline agreements, would add to the benefit for rural air passengers?
Well, I think you're referring to the Essential Air Services program in the States, and I believe that is a subsidy program. And I've never been a big advocate of subsidies. I think that there are other ways to accomplish what you want to accomplish. I think that the policy front and the regulatory front, steps that can be taken to allow regional carriers to compete, and investments in infrastructure are probably maybe bigger priorities. Certainly, subsidies were absolutely essential during COVID. We would have run out of cash were it not for subsidies. We're very thankful for those. But a lot of the subsidy dollars, in effect, funded empty seats flying around on the gateway routes. So that wasn't super productive. The market reverted to a pre-deregulation level of economic activity. In my mind, it would have been a good opportunity for the government to use the subsidies with conditions. It would have produced dollars better spent. And I think that, I don't think anybody likes to see operations subsidized. You never seem to get the type of efficiency that you should in that regard. So I would lean towards focusing on ways that small carriers can be competitive rather than the subsidy route.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bachrach. Next, we have Mr. Strahl. Mr. Strahl, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. I want to follow up on that, Mr. Sparling. We've seen. We just came off of a study, probably for the more southern routes, the major airlines, talking about some of the reasons that Lynx Air and some others have failed on some of the more traditional routes, some of the Vancouver, Toronto, etc. That was their bread and butter, and they couldn't make it work. And we heard about fees, we heard about regulatory environment, and I know you both of the Northern Airlines there mentioned reconsidering the user pay model. We know some modes of transport the government of Canada heavily subsidizes. We just read an article this morning about the Canadian Vancouver to Toronto train subsidizes the passengers at about $1,000 per passenger for what can only be described really as tourist travel. No one's traveling that route for business or for essential services, I would argue. How do you feel that the government should treat the different modes of transport between, say, rail in the south and air in the north? And what changes do you think, you said that they should reconsider the user pay model. What exactly are you looking for there?
Well, we don't have toll booths on our highways. We all agree that that highways are a necessary piece of infrastructure, and the funding for highways is generally provided out of the public coffers. Aviation is treated differently. The airport rents, I think, are probably the biggest example of where the government is expecting users to pay for that infrastructure. And I think rural Canada, there's no better case for publicly funded infrastructure than air travel in rural Canada. I mean, you've heard every witness here talk about the large geography, the small population, how air travel is a necessity. I think the infrastructure for air service should be treated in the same manner as our highway infrastructure. It's necessary, and it should be publicly funded. And to the best of my knowledge, I know many other countries treat it that way, if not most other countries. So right. I think it's time for a change in the model. And, the notion of an ultra low-cost carrier in Canada is a bit of an oxymoron because we're not an ultra low-cost environment. And I think those are steps that need to be taken. Make us a lower-cost environment and airfares can go down.
Right. To the folks at Canadian North, you also spoke about, I think you both did, but perhaps more the Canadian North folks talked about the gravel runway issue. I'm hoping you could maybe talk to me about whether or not that issue, paving some runways, which would allow for additional types of aircraft, is a possibility, given the climate in some of those places. And would that those sorts of investments would they actually bring competition from some of the bigger carriers who would then have access to those airports, whereas they currently wouldn't have the equipment that's capable of landing on some of those gravel runways?
Yes, I'm going to use Cambridge Bay as an example. We needed a gravel kit jet to be able to land there. We had to retire that Boeing 737-200 because it was a one-off in our fleet, but also they no longer produce the parts that you need to be able to operate. The only thing that can replace that service going into Cambridge Bay was 2 ATRs, one passenger, one freighter. That's two different kind of aircrafts that's going now at the cost of the one Boeing 737-200 that we had prior to. This is obviously a big impact on that community. Having a paved runway would absolutely help with the Boeing going in. Other carriers would likely take that opportunity. They won't invest, though, in the other communities that we serve on the ATR markets that are much smaller in the gravels.
Okay. And you mentioned as well regulatory adjustments that you felt needed to be made. Could you expand on that in the time we have left?
Absolutely. We operate in a very unique environment, and the regulatory policies that we have in place do not contribute to the success that we have. The APPR, the pilot crew duty, has heavily impacted what we are able to fly in a day in comparison to what we were doing 2 years ago. So those adjustments need to see. People need to understand our communities in order to make those adjustments.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Strahl. Next, we have Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses with us today, participating in this very important study. With your knowledge, experience, and involvement in the airline industry, of course, in rural and remote areas of Canada, we appreciate the information you provide. I know all of us as MPs, as we travel to extreme areas of the country, from one end to the other, like Mr. Backrack in Western Canada and myself in Newfoundland and Labrador, the challenges we face on a regular basis flying home to get back to our ridings it's extreme. To fly into Gander sometimes takes me a day and a half to get home, kind of thing, from Ottawa. You can imagine that. I know a lot of challenges had to do with weather, and there's all kinds of issues around staff shortage with major airlines like Air Canada, WestJet. We've had those folks here talk to us about this stuff. What we want to find out as a committee, of course, is what can you tell us that we can do to improve in the airline industry for our rural and remote areas? What is that we need to do as a government, and what we need to do as an industry? So for Mr. Sparling, your research and your extensive experience with Air North, I'd like, first of all, for you to talk to us about the challenges you have faced, even though you identified some things in your previous comments, and some of the lessons that you've learned operating in Northern Canada, for example, and operating aircraft and so on. So if you take a few minutes, and anybody else that'd like to jump in on that comment, I'd welcome their comments. So, Mr. Sparling?
Well, I spoke a little bit about the difference between our turboprop routes, our northern routes, and our southern routes, and the increased costs and operational challenges. Shelley mentioned similar challenges with Canadian North, but the investment in infrastructure, the ability to our ability to upgrade our fleets is limited by the gravel runways that we operate into. The lack of LPV approaches in the north, the higher weather limits, there's a greater number of weather delays, and there's a greater number of turnbacks, less alternates. All of those things make the northern operations more challenging. And if we can address some of those things through investments in infrastructure, it will improve our ability to provide the service that the communities we serve expect. Your situation getting into Gander, that's, if it's foggy, it's foggy, and there's not much anybody can do. But, there is Dawson City, one of our key northern airports. The approach limits are better than 1,000 feet. And, you compare that with Vancouver, where your limits are 200 feet. So, the increasing the approach capability will increase the reliability of the service.
Mr. Shelley, I guess.
Shelley.
You want to comment?
No, I think recognizing the realities that we have, the regulations that are in place don't recognize those. We face an average of 175 weather cancellations a month. Big part of it in the Baffin Island. Our closest airport from Iqaluit is an hour away on a jet, an hour and a half away on an ATR. Those operational expenses cannot be overlooked.
I've flown Air North and Canada North, sorry, and enjoyed the flight, quite frankly, to the north. So what I'd like to ask is all of you, I guess, to make, for the benefit of the committee, to make specific recommendations, as you've been doing today, that would really inform this study. Be specific, be direct, and give us the benefit of your knowledge and experience, and make sure that we know exactly what it is that we as a committee should be recommending in this study to the Government of Canada.
Flying to Higiktakjuak in the middle of winter, I think you would recognize the hardships that we face. Policies that are created without realizing the realities that we have, I think has been really, really challenging on us, because including us in our voice in the decisions that are being made, because we know the North the most and the rural communities.
And I recognize that we, during COVID period, of course, very difficult times, the Government of Canada invested significant dollars in infrastructure and support for airports and so on. So that's the kind of thing that I think the only thing that might help in terms of improving services in rural and remote areas of the country. Thanks, all of you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rogers. Next, we have Mr. Muse. Mr. Muse, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for taking time out, both in person and virtually, and those that have traveled. The comment has certainly been made a number of times about, this being a lifeline for communities. And Ms. DeCaria, you mentioned in your opening remarks that there were 21 communities that you service that, would otherwise have no access. Whether it's yourselves or others that are witnesses, is it possible to quantify like how many communities or a range of number of communities in Canada that fall into that camp? Like it's more than 21, I'm presuming.
We have 21 that are isolated with no road access. We service 25 communities in the Arctic, but 21 of which are isolated. The only way in is by our aircrafts.
But are there other communities outside of those 25?
Absolutely.
So how many in Canada would be in that?
Nunavik alone has 15. We only service one of those, so I can't give you an exact number as to how many are.
Just for context, I wanted to understand sort of the volume we're talking about.
We have, in the 25 communities, we have 130,000 people. As I mentioned, that's equal to one city here down south. A lot of those, I'm from Kuujjuaq, it's a jet service, and there's 3,000 people.
So in addition to being a lifeline for communities, I mean, it's also crucial to our economy. And I know that's been discussed and talked about in the testimony we've had today. So I'm just wondering from each of the witnesses, how do you see what's the trajectory in terms of opportunity for travel to northern and remote communities for the Canadian economy? Like, are we in an upward trajectory? Are we, what do you see over the next 5-10 years?
Many of Canada's northern communities have higher levels of population growth than southern communities. That coupled with access to critical goods also being by air transport, I believe it will continue to increase the requirement that is for air transportation to those communities.
Mr. Sparling, from an Air North perspective, do you have any thoughts on that?
I would say that the northern economies are all growing, and I would say the trajectory is positive. I think we've seen historical travel growth, and I think we'll continue to see it. The need to facilitate it and improve the infrastructure, I think, will only increase.
And Mr. Gervais?
Yes, reactivating. I've got an answer for about your question though, and with you even the committee did a report on that, but it was from the OAG, Office of the Auditor General. There was a report tabled in 2017, and the OAG identified 117 airports that serve remote and northern communities, defined as communities for which only reliable year-round mode of transportation was air. So we're talking about 117 out there. Maybe there are more, maybe there are some, maybe under the rising sea, but 117 airports at that time.
That's a significant number for sure. So the study that we previously were looking at this committee immediately prior to this was with regard to the competitiveness of air travel in Canada. And we heard from WestJet and Air Canada that, the recommendation of a review of taxes and fees and service charges and the regulatory burden that were compounding the competitiveness, and we've heard testimony today and some examples from the perspective of or with a lens in particular on northern remote air travel. Would you agree with that? And are there any further examples of fees and costs that you want to cite or that we want to reiterate for the purposes of this study? So maybe I'll just again turn to Canadian North, and then we'll go around the table.
Certainly the increase in fees and costs we've seen over the last few years has made it more difficult to operate in many of our communities, specifically air navigation costs, landing fees and charges, just about every other fee and cost directly imposed by the government we do have to pass on to the traveling public, which makes it more difficult and may ultimately destroy travel demand by making it unaffordable.
Air North?
Well, I think the note about impacting demand is huge. I think air travel is very price elastic, and the higher the cost, the less people are going to travel. And I think that I think part of this study was driven by the perception that domestic airfares are too high, and I think your market study, which I think is going to be part of the process, is going to disclose that the primary reason that airfares are high is the cost of flying in Canada. So absolutely, if we get the costs down, the airfares will come down.
Thank you, Mr. Sparling. Prochainement, nous avons Mr. Iacono. Mr. Iacono, la parole est à vous.
Mr. Iacono, over to you for 5 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my question is addressed to the UMQ, Mr. Daniel Cote. According to your data, how many additional controllers would be needed in order to have optimal coverage in regional airports? We do not have that data. There are probably specialists who can address this question better than us. Were you consulted on the commercial decisions when some of those lines were cancelled? No, we were informed, not consulted, because this is a purely unregulated and private market. We're just informed about the cancellation of these routes, and sometimes we are told about a change of minds when you try to book a ticket, and sometimes we're simply not informed. Well, your response is interesting because you talked about private entities. So for the record, we must mention that airline companies are private companies. Hence is the reason why the government of Canada cannot intervene and tell these airline carriers how to manage things internally and how to determine their modus operandi. We can simply intervene in terms of setting tariffs and prices, which is what is already being done. And so the issue here is not that we're not doing anything, but also we should admit there's limitations to what can be done when it comes to airline carriers. For instance, we act a lot when it comes to airports. We invest a lot of money in airport infrastructure. We invested significantly during the pandemic. We helped a significant number of companies, and so we acted. And for you to mention that we are not very present, I think it's a bit too hard. It's um, it's a bit unfair in certain terms. Do you think that airline companies should consult local communities? Absolutely. And I could also address your other concerns. If you consider that $38 million annually on Canadian scale is significant infrastructure investment, for us, that would barely cover the needs of one airport annually. So this is not significant investment. The other question, you have the possibility to act to regulate the market. And right now, this is a decision that has been in place by the federal government to allow a free market. Are you aware of how much money was invested across all the airports? You already have the amount. You mentioned it since 2015 to today. Are you aware of the amounts that were invested before 2015 with the previous governments? Because were these amounts higher? Were there even any amounts? Were there any investments? This is a question I'm asking you because you're aware of what we're doing, how much we've injected in this sector, and you think it's not enough. You're criticizing the amount. So let me know if you're aware of how much money was invested by previous governments during the 10 years they were in power. Well, I mean, I'm not being partisan here. I mean, it's a legitimate question I'm asking because you're focused on numbers. So I'd like you to, to know if you are aware, if you know what the numbers are, previous numbers, let us know. Mr. Chair, I'd like to have the opportunity to respond as well. It's a matter of respect. So what we documented is that it's between 38 and $41 million as part of the PIA program. And right now it's 38 million. There's been news to the effect that we could come down to $0 in the years to come. So we're trying to make sure that the 38 million is increased. And there's been a situation where it's been 41 million, but it's always fluctuating between 38 to $41 million. We've not conducted a comprehensive study going back to the previous 100 years, but over the past 10 years, it's between 38 and 41 million. Do you think that setting of fixed rate for regional flights will be beneficial or detrimental to regional air transport? So we studied this at the UMQ, and we think it would be beneficial for small carriers to ensure that there's no dumping of prices from the major carriers who come and crush the competition. So this floor price could have a beneficial impact, and the ceiling price could have a beneficial impact as well. But what we know right now is that we need an entity that determines what are the minimal routes to a service across the regions, and this would be the most profitable approach. And like it's been done in several regions across the U.S. and in Western Australia as well. So through you, Mr. Chair, can you provide us with some of those case studies? Which airports are involved, and which countries where this approach has been experimented? Yes, of course, we have that documentation and we can provide it. Thank you, Mr. Iacono and Mr. Coutet. And next up is Mr. Barcelou Duval. Over to you for 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will continue where they just left off with Mr. Iacono, the question. And now, we've often been told in witness accounts here from carriers as well that regional markets, and on regional markets, we want more competition. But sometimes you realize that the market is so small that when you have 2, 3, 4 players trying to service that market, or an already small market, it's already tough to fill up a plane. How do you go about, filling up 2, 3 planes from different carriers? So the solution, which could maybe come out of this, is to find a way to ensure that the free market is present, if I understand from your proposal, but at the same time, going with a regulated system where you have a bidding system, so the region would determine its needs and then go ahead with a tender system in order to address its specific needs. Have you had discussions with the federal government on this system? Do you have any idea whether this idea will be well received? That's the first aspect, a part of my question. Second part, now, what would it take in terms of changes, regulatory or legal changes, in order for you to be able to operate this way? Because from what I understand, you are not able to operate in that way based on the current laws. Yes, that's what we understood, and you really summed up the model that we are advising, that we are recommending. And I mean, I don't have the full details, but for a number of years now, what was established in terms of regulations is that we would let the free market determine things. So, and and all of that, ignoring the amount of profit that these private players could make, and this is an essential service, and without this service, people would not have access to health or other services. So essential services such as regional air transport, to me, deserves a certain attention from the part of the state. We're not saying that you should allow the free market and have more subsidies. What we're saying is that we can arrive at the proper result at a lower cost, but also while enabling the players to be able to compete through a bidding system. We would have maybe one carrier per area, and they would compete upstream, and that way we will be able to arrive at a better result. At least we can test this method out. So in this case, would this require any spending on the part of government in order to ensure this? Well, most likely, yes. Like every essential service deserves minimum support from the state. But let us look at the other models, like some places in the US that we can be able to provide the committee with. Thank you, Mr. Cote and Mr. Barcelou Duval.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the promises of competition, of course, isn't only lower prices, but also better service. And I think one of the things we've seen in regional centers or more rural centers is that when you have just a single carrier, some of those services get contracted out, and that can cause frustrations for passengers who are trying to get customer service. I wonder, Mayor Attrell, if you could talk about the situation at the Smithers Airport and some of the stories that you've heard from folks in terms of transparency and communication.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Bachrach. It is one of the problems, and when we're talking about, regulation to protect something that's critical, when there is an issue with a flight coming in, Air Canada uses a subcontractor, Jazz. That's fine. Jazz uses a contractor at the airport. So when there is a problem, there is no service for the customer. We are told that there is a 1-800 number, but I've been at the airport when things go wrong, and you can't reach anyone, so you're left with a terminal full of passengers trying to figure out how to help themselves. And so people are swirling and trying to figure out, can they get a car? Can they drive to the next airport? So I think some transparency on how service is delivered, mandatory. We hear a lot about passenger rights, but this is one time when passengers are truly left stranded. If a flight doesn't come in or connections can't be made, that passengers are just left. They don't know who to talk to. The contractor, because they don't work for Air Canada, have no access to the system. So except for handing out a card with a number that doesn't get answered, there is no service. So I think there are ways to ensure that there are, the critical service is maintained. The experts on the panel have talked about that, but also to make sure passengers are protected in a real way that is ground truthed, so that when something goes wrong, passengers aren't just left stranded. And in our case, it is a single carrier and they can't be reached. Yeah, so thanks for that. I think there is some room to improve the quality, and I'm sorry to say I think that would have to be by regulation.
And with the seconds I have left, and how many of those seconds are there, Mr. Chair?
30, sir.
Well, I was going to give Mayor Attrell a chance just to talk a little bit about what the town of Smithers has done to improve the airport and make it more competitive in order to better serve the airlines that use it. That's probably 20 seconds left now, but if you want to list some of the things, that would be wonderful.
Sure. We've done everything we can. The runway is extended. It's repaved. We're improving the lighting. We're looking at all the mandatory tree clearing. I think the one other thing that would go with regulation, because I'm hearing about the cost to airlines, is that if we are mandated to do things, and we will, make it so that we can afford it. So if we're not going to actually transfer the cost back to the users of the airport, the airlines, then the federal government has to consider that. We will do the improvements that we have to, because we'll keep the airport in good shape, but there has to be consideration for how those costs are paid.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Attrell. Next, we have Mr. Davidson. Mr. Davidson, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Well, thank you. Thank you. This is great. We get more time. We can explore a few more things. Shall I'd like to ask you just to go in more depth, just so people have a comprehension about the, you know, the different worlds that are out there between, call it the north, urban and rural. You know, I've slept a few nights on a beaver in a lake, and I know that different challenges come up and how the regulations, there may be a disconnect. The regulations, for example, on duty days, how that affects your business, your scheduling, your shortage of pilots, all those sort of things.
I'll go into the crew duty first. We don't have different, I'll use the Baffin Island as an example. If we have 5 extra medical passengers out of Iqaluit and want to go to Hikiktakchuak, adding that stop eliminates 3 hours automatically. It's only a 40-minute layover, but it immediately sets us back by 3 hours. So now I cannot bring these 5 passengers and I can't add that extra stop. That trickles on our business. As I mentioned earlier, I have 175 cancellations a month. It impacts our business. The pilots do want to fly, but if they start at 7 in the morning, they're done by 2 in the afternoon, which we used to have more hours to be able to operate to bring these critical services to the communities that we serve.
And when you talk about critical services, not that again, I'm focused on Ontario, so, you know, we talked about the government, you know, municipality, I'll talk about Timmins and the Sioux. During the pandemic, you know, a lot of these regional airports had to be open for medevacs, for police, for firefighting, and just from a regional airport, and they didn't get the big subsidies that we saw a lot of big companies get. In fact, we have municipalities fighting with the federal government now in Ontario because they didn't receive anything. And that's put them on their back feet right now, is what it's done, because they were owned by the municipalities, but they were the front line of defense for fire, for medevacs, and how important medevacs are in the north for the health of Canadians.
It's a consistent answer to some of the discussion we've had where the requirement to invest in that critical infrastructure and take the cost away from the user is going to make it easier for those airports to thrive and easier for carriers to bring service into those airports.
Right. And I look at those services, I mean, you know, talking about rural Canada, I live on a First Nations in the middle of Lake Simcoe on Georgina Island in York Simcoe, and talking about the disconnect with the government. We don't even get the rural top up on the carbon tax. But yet, anytime the federal government interacts with us, we're classified as rural and remote. So there's a misunderstanding by the federal government on that. But again, to how important it is for Canadians, for their health, and the service that regional airlines provide, again, for medevacs. You know, we need the government to understand, you know, if you're shooting an approach into Toronto, you've got all kinds of options. But again, up to you. You know, we're dealing with gravel slips. You know, we're dealing with maybe still an old ADF. You know, doing an NDB backcourse approach so people understand your minimums might only be 1,200 feet, and the challenges that all that we see now in the north. And I've been told quickly, because I don't think I have a lot of time, Chair, but how Transport Canada approving GPS approaches now, with them decommissioning NDBs. Do you see that as happening fast enough? And do you see the minimums that you're allowed to shoot an approach satisfactory?
No. The aircrafts that we have are quite old. To upgrade those, it's quite economically just not feasible for us right now, given the seats that are on the aircraft. Getting those tools would be extremely beneficial with the amounts of cancellations that we have in weather in a month. And I want to go back to the medevac that you're speaking of. All the medical patients that fly on our scheduled services is not considered medevac. So those pilots get to land in these airports sometimes, while my guys don't get to do it because it's called scheduled services.
Well, it's called scheduled services.
So there's a difference in the medevac can fly because it's medical, but the medical patients on my aircraft that can only get there on our aircraft is not considered medevac.
So do you feel the government is disconnected when it comes to that?
Absolutely. What's the difference between this and that?
No, and that's a good point to be made here. Okay, so I think we've covered costs. I think, Mr. Spalding, you hit the nail on the head. You know, if we can lower the costs, i.e. on taxes, i.e. on fuel, i.e. on red tape, i.e. on regulations, lower costs, input costs, obviously mean lower costs for the consumer. Would you not agree?
Yes, absolutely.
And would
Thank
the
you
other
very
witnesses
much,
agree?
Mr. Davidson.
Oh, I got a red flag again. Sorry, everyone. I got to sign off.
Thank you, Mr. Davidson. And finally up for today, we have Mr. Fillmore. Mr. Fillmore, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks, witnesses. I'd like to start off with some questions for our friends at the Northern Air Transport Association. And I wonder if you could talk about any conversations or consultations that you've undertaken with larger airlines to provide services to and from the north, and if so, what have those conversations been like? What has the content been?
Referring to me, you're talking about the bigger airlines, the ones in the south?
Yeah.
Okay, I have not been part of that. I'm fairly new with NATA, but no, I have not talked with these.
Okay. Well, then I'd like to open it up more broadly to the other members of the panel as well. I mean, the problem I think that many people are trying to crack here is how we improve and make more affordable transportation back and forth between the north and the south in this context. And was anyone able to comment on investments that are being made or should be made in other modes of transportation to help improve these important transportation links?
If I may.
Please.
Okay, because I've gone over the report, the Auditor General's report, and looking at the northern infrastructure. Obviously, it's hard to build roads. Some places there will never have roads. And as we mentioned before, 117 airports, or at least maybe more communities, are touched by that. So it's only air service. It's the essential service there, and there's not much more that could be done. Intermodal with, because I've looked at the auditor's report, and intermodal is something that should be and could be looked at. But then again, climate changes are impacting sea levels, fog, and even ice bridges and ice roads like the Mackenzie River and some roads like that, natural roads. So there's a study to be done on that, and it's been studied quite a bit. It's time to prioritize.
Okay. I recall quite a while ago, I was in my university years and I had a friend who lived in Lab City, Labrador City. And at that time, for her and her family to get from Lab City to Nova Scotia, it involved putting their car on a train, and the train then would put the car back on the road because there was no road. I understand since then a road has been built, but I sort of want to go back to the answer to the previous question about other investments we can make. Like if air travel continues to be a serious challenge and expense for people, I appreciate your comment about climate change, and I presume that's around sort of softening tundra and that kind of thing. Surely there are, or maybe I shouldn't say surely, are there some routes that are viable for building either rail or roads? You may not be the right panel to ask this, but I guess we're here on a sort of casting around for ideas. If you had any other thoughts about alternatives to airlines getting north to south, that would be helpful.
I mean, I could chip in as a mayor if that's appropriate.
Please.
You know, where I live on the Yellowhead Highway. There's a major transportation route north, Highway 37, that goes to the Yukon, and I would say in all of our transportation corridors, the investment in having them adequately served hasn't been made over time. And I sense we're in a catch-up, and the catch-up is very expensive. And while we see major developments along, in Northwest British Columbia, on the coast of British Columbia, one of the challenges for our governments to tackle is what is the right rate of return back to the public so that we can afford to have the transportation corridors. Our highways are not adequate for what's going on. We have a single rail line going past us to the coast. It's not double tracked. These are massively expensive infrastructure developments that are needed. And I think the fact that they haven't kept up over time means we are in this critical juncture. So the airlines and the airport investment is needed. coupled with ensuring that when people can drive, they can. The distance by road from us to Whitehorse is 1,225 kilometers. It's the same as to Vancouver. These are huge distances, but there are large transports on those roads, and we're going to have to face the fact that collectively we're going to have to take enough out of the tax pot of those developments to help pay for all of this necessary infrastructure. I don't envy anyone trying to make their way, but I think that's where we're at.
Okay, thank you for that. Maybe a final question for Air North, then, if I could, Mr. Sparling. In the not too distant future, not too distant past, rather, as part of the Indigenous and Northern Affairs Committee, I visited Northern Indigenous communities to speak to youth about challenges that they were facing. And a persistent story was the cost of getting back and forth to universities. For example, either ruled out going to university, or if they were able to get a flight down there at the beginning of the semester, they couldn't afford to come home at Christmas or other holidays because of the prohibitive cost. Has there ever been any discussion about programs to help get students back and forth at a subsidized or discounted price?
Students travel back and forth for almost every holiday weekend. I don't see that as an issue in our market at all. Our airfares are very affordable, and in the past, you are correct. It was an impediment to kids pursuing post-secondary education, but I think since we've been in the market, that's changed, and we see kids every holiday weekend going back and forth.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sparling, and thank you very much, Mr. Fillmore. I'd like to thank all of our witnesses, those who appeared virtually or in person, for their testimony today and for sharing their expertise with us. With that, this meeting is adjourned.